I have about 20 slideshow, and then I will also demonstrate. I have a spreadsheet for assessment points on AI governance. And if you have a question, please ask the question anytime, either by speaking or by putting the question in the chat. So today's webinar is on AI governance. AI is a very popular subject right now. Companies are integrating AI in every sort of business. I was watching a video about a shoe company that proclaimed that they're going to pivot towards AI, and their stock went up like 300%. So it's quite interesting that it is currently the next big popular thing. So with integrating AI in businesses, companies face certain risks of data exposure. So I'll talk about how those risks are different now, and how AI makes those data exposure risks and data leak risks more prevalent. So known AI data exposure incidents. In 2025, a critical zero-click prompt injection flaw allowed attackers to send emails with hidden instructions through Outlook connected app, causing Copilot to extract sensitive data from OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. Also in 2025, there was a study on use of AI, and 77% of employees paste company data into generative AI tools, and that causes 97% of AI-related breaches because there's a lack of control for data. So this led to 20% of organizations that onboarded AI in 2025 to suffer data breaches, with 65% of cases affecting customer PII, personally identifiable information, and intellectual property. With research revealed that 65% of top private AI companies leak sensitive information, API keys, tokens, credentials. In 2026, there was an AI chat app leak. It's a agent AI. 300 million messages tied to 25 million users were leaked, including sensitive information. Olama vulnerability incident in 2025. There was an insecure configuration in Olama AI that was followed a prompt engineering and data context breach. That data was accessed without restrictions, and attackers were able to extract sensitive user data through unencrypted channels. Higgins face access tokens in 2024 allowed unauthorized access to Space's platform, and it exposed potentially access to authentication secrets. Repo AI coding assistant, it's another AI agent from Replit. It went rogue and deleted a production database during a code freeze, generating thousands of fake user records. It tried to actually hide what it did. SalesLoft and Drift auth token. There was a token abuse by an attacker who used OAuth tokens from Salesforce integration to access 700 plus organizational sandbox environments, exfiltrating contacts and tokens used by users. So when user switches one access pattern to another, it's called a snowflake token. So AI was leaking those tokens. Altruistic AI model hijack in 2025 used a malicious payload that was injected into a public AI agent, and it was downloaded by developers, infecting thousands of systems with crypto mining software. So these are some of the well-known incidents. How do we reduce exposure from AI? So governance should be thought of prior to rollout. There should be defined policies and controls in place. Companies should have visibility before trust. So have visibility into what data, information, records are available to AI, and then control that information data before it's being used by AI or reused by AI, and control that access. So when we deploy Copilot to businesses, we typically deploy it in a sandbox and onboard users from different departments that have different various access methods and permissions, so we can see what they're having access to and what they are able to search. So how is the context exposed through Copilot? If you deploy Copilot, right now, if you deploy a new Microsoft 365 tenant, you get Copilot by default, and you actually have to disable it to abstain from using it. Copilot can access SharePoint files and records, OneDrive files, Teams chats and meetings, Outlook emails, and in Exchange also, if you have public folders, if you have connectors in Exchange, shared mailboxes, Copilot and connected AI agents can access all of that. They can also access external repositories, Azure Blob Storage, third-party connectors, and graph connectors. The key controls for this are permissions and access, so limit content access, search control, by restricting search discovery and what search is available, label and DLP. So that's the Microsoft Purview product. If you're running a Microsoft environment, if you place a label on a document and then it has separate permissions, that is also segregated for Copilot. And then connector governance, control what connectors are available to users who are using Copilot or another AI, and control what data is being accessed through those connectors. I'll go through an overview of Microsoft 365 Copilot architecture. So you have the user experience apps, Word, Teams, Outlook, Copilot. So right now, Copilot can be integrated with all of those or connected to those applications. And then there's Copilot orchestration. Language processing, when somebody submits a prompt, that prompt is processed through a natural language model. There's a large language model that can process documents, large amounts of text or documents within a repository that's connected, and then response generation. So based on the information that's submitted to Copilot or Copilot ingests through a connector, it will generate a response. So those are the content sources: SharePoint, OneDrive, Team, email, and connectors. And it utilizes semantic index and Microsoft Search. So Microsoft has recently separated the two search capabilities. There's one called Copilot Search, which is basically the same search as Microsoft Search, which was used for enterprise search. Enterprise search is a Microsoft product going back to 2010, which encompasses Exchange, SharePoint. If there's an agent on a machine to allow indexing and search, then that agent can connect to Microsoft Search. So it's a unified search platform. So that's Microsoft Search. Copilot Search is a Microsoft improved version of that that is designed for Copilot. And there's also a Graph Pulse. And Microsoft Graph is a structured language that can retrieve settings from a Microsoft 365 tenant, look for settings, look for configuration, look for metadata. So Graph can be called by Copilot to retrieve data that's available to the user making the prompt. So how does the permission and discovery model work for Microsoft 365 Copilot? There is some content that exists in SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and Exchange. Access can exist or not exist for a user. So that's basically permissions based. Does user have permission to access a certain document? If permissions exists and access exists, then content may be eligible for retrieval by the user. And then Copilot search will check if the content is discoverable, is it indexable and searchable, is it in Microsoft Search or semantic search. So semantic search will break up available index based on what data is available to a user. So if user doesn't have permission, then by design, index results and contextual search should not be available to the user. If the user has no access to files, data, then Copilot should not retrieve the answer. And it is less likely to be discoverable. That's not always the case, as we have found, because search has cached results that can be presented to a user. So that's something to watch out for. If user has access and contact is indexed, discoverable, and searchable, then Copilot presents an answer through a prompt to the user. There is a limitation with DLP and Purview. If user has access and content is searchable, when the user tries to retrieve information from a file, or Copilot tries to retrieve information for a file to complete a prompt for a user, if there's a label on the document, by design, Copilot should stop and not present those answers. That's the intended design. So what type of search does Copilot use? It uses Microsoft Graph, which is a data and permissions layer. That is the gateway to Microsoft 365 and related cloud data, such as connectors into Azure. Graph carries the user group content and access context that applies to that user. So in simple term, it's retrieval of metadata for what data exists and what is accessible to the user. What does user have permissions and access to? Microsoft Search and Enterprise Search is the user search experience and retrieval that uses the enterprise index in the search. It is the user-facing search system that you use in SharePoint or OneDrive when you search for a document. And Copilot Search is the Microsoft current AI-powered, AI-flavored universal search experience across Microsoft 365. It connects to third-party searchers. You can search in simple terms. So that layer is for users' convenience, and it's able to create synthetic results. So previously, if you went to enterprise search and you put in a phrase, a language phrase that's not interpretable by Microsoft Search, then you may have limited results or no results, or it may give you too many results. Copilot Search allows you to synthesize results. So you can ask questions. How much money does my boss make? Who sued the company last year for defamation or sexual harassment? So you can create those human language searches, and Copilot will search based on that and create synthetic results. And then semantic index for Microsoft 365 Copilot is the grounded enhanced search where semantic understanding of the language is interpreted by Copilot, and it can retrieve contextual results. So if you're looking for, you can prompt it and say, I'm looking for a summary of all customers that the company did business with last year and how large were their orders or how much money they spent with us. So those complex sentences you can put into the search, Copilot search or prompt, and then that semantic index will prepare the prompt response for you. Governance components. So key Copilot governance components are permissions. It goes back to permissions, overly broad sharing, and users moving inside the organization and retain their Snowflake permissions are the biggest one. Whether they have those permissions will allow Copilot to present them results. So they may not be using, they don't know how to use the search, or they may not be using it as a savvy advanced user. So Copilot will bridge that gap for them. So as long as they have permissions, they'll be able to see that. Copilot just makes it easier to search. Enterprise search controls. So I will go over the assessment and the granular controls, but some of the restrictions you can put in place are blocking specific URLs in SharePoint, sites, and repositories from producing results in Copilot. And that's done in the search configuration by limiting sites, URLs, oversharing governance. You can produce a report on what's being shared and what has broad permissions and try to tune down that oversharing. For example, if you have a SharePoint site that's shared to an entire department in a company, maybe it's time to break that site into smaller teams, permissions, and share it in a more granular fashion. Sensitive file protection, that's Purview and DLP controls. So labeling and limiting permissions to sensitive repositories of files and also SharePoint sites. You can assign permissions to Entra ID groups or Active Directory groups if you have the on-prem connector for Purview to limit content within content, as we say. Files within repositories can have more granular permissions and can also be encrypted so that when they're sent outside the organization, or if they're submitted to Copilot, let's say I grab a document that is Purview protected with a label, and that label carries encryption. If I submit that document into Copilot, upload it to Copilot for a prompt or to OpenAI, they will not be able to open it because the file has more granular permission on it. And then monitoring and review. You're able to review what searches have been conducted or what prompts submitted to Copilot through the search index history. And you can pay a closer attention to what users are searching for and what results are being retrieved. So why does governance matter now? AI adoption is accelerating at a very fast pace. It's adopting faster than the maturity of governance. Most tenants already have hidden oversharing and access that's broader than desired. Copilot and other AI capabilities can make that more visible to the user. And Copilot makes that information easier to access, discover, and reuse. So as the adoption of AI accelerates, so should adoption of governance of that AI. So what does Copilot do, and how does governance create controls and guardrails for Copilot? Copilot will ground responses for any data in Microsoft 365. So it can save responses in history. It will locate data that's relevant to the user search, make it presentable to the user, and make it reusable for that user. The graph pulse search can retrieve metadata about that information, which makes it easier for the user to go through, digest, and reuse, because it will look at dates. I can submit a prompt and say, give me all contracts that we have signed within the past year or past 2 months. So if a user wants to get some sensitive information, they can make their search and their discovery more targeted and do it quicker. But generally, it's the access that a user already has. It just Copilot puts faster, easier synthetic access on that data. So current problems with governance. First, again, it's oversharing. In exchange, it's shared mailboxes that multiple users have access to without knowing what data is inside those boxes. Mailboxes what I often see is a department will have a department mailbox with 30 users in it. And when user performs a search in Copilot, then they would be presented with results that were in that mailbox before the user was added, or user may have moved from one department in a company to another, from one team to another. They became a snowflake, but they still have access to that mailbox. And same for OneDrives and SharePoint sites. Users can ask questions in plain language, and the AI search agent will cross-reference different documents and synthesize the result to present one quick-to-access response to the user. So with SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, that will include chat histories in Teams, documents shared. SharePoint is a repository for Teams, but Copilot will also search notes, projects, apps that are within Teams. So once a user is a member of a team, they can have access to any app within Teams that's indexable by search. So that scattered content from various repositories and apps can be synthesized into a single document. So you could have information that's scattered throughout your Microsoft 365 tenant and connected repositories, but when user performs the search through Copilot, submits a prompt, Copilot will look through search capabilities, indexes, see what's available to the user, and then pull that data from various sources to give the user the result. So that is the unique. Some of the common exposure scenarios, overshared landscape, and content that belongs to leadership, HR, company management, finance departments, OneDrive content that has anyone links. So somebody shares a folder from their OneDrive and clicks on the checkbox that says anyone with this link can access. That link remains in OneDrive, and in that condition, if it suffices, then Copilot can search that because it's available to anyone. So this is seen fairly frequently. Somebody wants to share content real quick, and they create a share all link so that anyone can access. So chat history in Teams, content in meetings, meeting notes, users who are in the meetings and then putting something in the chat that gets saved in that team that's available to all members of the team, even if they weren't in that meeting, or may not have been paying attention. So that piece of information can be linked to something else, and then synthetic content can be produced. And then big risk is connectors. So you can connect various repositories in Copilot, and that can be blob storage in Azure, shared storage, AWS storage connectors. So if Copilot is allowed to search in those and the user has permissions to access, then they can connect Copilot to that repository and search through that repository, and then sync and synchronize that data for availability with other sources. How does Copilot know what it can search? It can search anything that's in the semantic index or in Microsoft Search. So it will search there first. It will read through the index and through enterprise search to see what's available and if there's relevance in the index between the user prompt. And it tries different variations. So a user might submit who sued the company last year for sexual harassment, and Copilot will, because it has language model capabilities, it will create variations of that prompt and then use the variations of the prompt in the index to see what results might be relevant to the prompt by the user. It will look through anyone links in OneDrive. It will look through Teams and Exchange and connected repositories. So as Copilot trains, it will cache locations that it had previously searched. And when a different user prompts it will access them faster. And actually, when you deploy Copilot, it gets connected to the search and it knows where the index is. It knows where semantic retrieval tree is located, how to access it. So it's modern that way because it will train itself on what kind of data can be accessed faster and where. So SharePoint and OneDrive. So years back, Microsoft had a product called SkyDrive. It was based on Windows file shares, and then they got sued by a company that made another product called SkyDrive. So as a remedy for that conflict, Microsoft moved OneDrive to SharePoint, and now all OneDrive sites are what's called personal SharePoint sites. They just call it OneDrive. So OneDrive is part of SharePoint, but users control individually in their personal site what they're sharing and how and who they're giving access to. So a user may be granting access to a group, external entity, unless that's blocked, and the organizations don't have a lot of control or governance of what the users are sharing unless they put a policy in place to block that. So that's one of the items that I will discuss. Broad site membership and in SharePoint, and also stale permissions. Permissions that have been granted to users in the past. A user leaves the company, their account is taken over by somebody else, or they move within a company, they go from HR to IT or HR to finance, but those stale permissions remain. And then high value business documents, business knowledge, maybe patented information, know-hows, HR, finance, management. If those documents have improper permissions, if they're not labeled, they can succumb to being searchable and discoverable by Copilot. So those are the biggest risks. And of course, connected repositories. In Teams and Exchange, it's meetings, chats, recordings, transcripts from meetings. If you're transcribing a meeting and the meeting is being recorded, transcribed, and then saved in Teams, then that content becomes searchable. If the users were invited to that meeting or they were in that team, they can retrieve that content. In Exchange, it's shared mailboxes, shared emails through something like Office 365 group or a public folder, shared mailboxes. So that content is also discoverable. Connectors, agents, and app permissions. That's a whole realm of possibilities. If connected repositories are allowed, then Copilot and AI agents can search within those repositories. And if you allow custom third-party agents, such as OpenAI, ChatGPT has the capability to connect to SharePoint, to OneDrive. It can make those connections into the repositories and then perform a search. So third-party agents can be used to perform the search and retrieve content as long as that connection is allowed. So by default in the tenant, it's allowed. So how do we remediate and how do we handle these risks? Number one, it's always content and permissions. We look at what content is available, what high value information exists. So usually when we perform assessments for customers for AI governance, we give them a questionnaire. We ask them to list their high value content. Is it HR? Is it finance? Is it know-how for your business? Designs, blueprints, schematics, patents, where they may be located. So customers will tell us often what kind of content they're worried about. Sometimes they know, sometimes they miss something. Sometimes somebody worked for a company and they put something somewhere that the management doesn't know about, and that's too broadly shared. So we ask the questions, but we also look for ourselves access. Who can access that content now? How is it searchable? How is it discoverable? and what controls are in place right now. What can limit Copilot search from going in there and performing search, submitting prompts, and retrieving results. So once we get a better understanding of that, then we can go a step further. There's some manual and some automated assessments that we can do, but it comes down to inventory of high-value information, review and control what current control exists in place now, review access and sharing capabilities, review permissions from DLP and Purview. Some customers have third-party permission management in place, like Varonis. What's in place now, and if there's anything on, are there any low-hanging fruits? Is there anything that can be logged down right away? So manual versus automated assessments and AI governance. So typically what we do is we perform some steps that are manual and some that are automated. The automated steps are we perform discovery through some scripts that we have been accumulating and improving over time that will enumerate broadly accessed resources, OneDrive, all shared links, open repositories, connected repositories, sites in SharePoint that have broad access to entire company or departments. We often see that sites that contain home pages or pages about the company, they also have a folder, and users will drop stuff in that folder to make it easy accessible to everyone. So that's something that an automated script can recognize and retrieve. We can quickly enumerate shared mailboxes and who has access to them. That content is searchable. If there are connectors to file repositories, we can enumerate what those file repositories are, where they are in AWS or Azure, and who has access to them now. And then manual review. Talk to stakeholders, ask them what are their biggest exposures, where the data is located, what's in place now for control. And then we'll often create users in different departments and give those test users access to Copilot and perform searches. Sometimes we find that what's provided as a prompt response by Copilot or ChatGPT is a lot more than the company management thought that they could retrieve. So we tested on department by department basis as well. So we're doing some spot checking into what's available. But this is how we build a governance portfolio by going in and doing the testing, manual checks, and also automated. And then we try to reduce that exposure. So where access is too broad, we ask the customers to adopt a least privilege framework for permissions, break large departments into teams, check snowflakes, people that have left, departed users. What we see very often is a user has left the company, but access was given to their manager or their peer. So now their manager or their peer has access. That manager or peer may have moved to a different team, but they still have access and they still have users submitting documents to those repositories that are still searchable. Restricting SharePoint search. So we can restrict SharePoint sites, OneDrive locations from results showing up in enterprise search and Copilot search. We can establish boundaries for the search. So we can only allow Copilot and agents to retrieve results from specific sites, or we can block specific sites. So this is how we create a boundary. We can look at what connectors exist, and we can block certain connectors or types of connectors. We can disallow connected through Azure Blob, for example. And then sensitivity and labeling, information sensitivity, document sensitivity. I have seen many customers that pay for like an E5 license or a G5 license, and they will have access to Purview available to them, but they either don't label the documents, they don't label the sites, or they don't have policy enforcement in place where they don't force the users to label new documents created. So those policies have to be enforced. Each time a new document is created, it must be labeled. Or users have older documents. Companies will have older documents that existed in repositories before Purview was deployed, but older documents that have not been accessed don't have a label and they don't have encryption, but they're still searchable. So I see this very often. Yes, the company will say, or the business owners will say, we're saved. We have Purview deployed, and then we'll go and look. But 80% of documents don't have a label and don't have encryption. Why? Because the customer has not gone through their documents to either enforce the document on creation or enforce the document on access to be labeled. And none of the old documents are labeled. So sensitivity labeling with Purview and some DLP policies will help that. There's also a way through Defender for Cloud Apps. It's a Microsoft product. It's a Microsoft Cloud Access Broker to put policies in place to go through the documents and label them based on document heuristics or document characteristics or history, put a label on them. So we have had to do that with many customers in the past where they just don't have the human power capability to go through all of their documents and put a label on them. So we put policies in place through Defender for Cloud Apps to go through those documents and label those documents to protect them from being searched by Copilot if the user doesn't have permissions to them. And then the operational model review, it's not a set in place one time and done. It's an input output. So the output is our review and assessment, and then we go through that, suggest improvements, deploy improvements, and then reevaluate, see where the model can be enhanced further for governance, and then we recycle it. We add something or we modify something to make it more usable and more effective. So the safe rollout roadmap for Copilot is do a base assessment, see what data is out there, what would be discoverable, define boundaries for Copilot, what Copilot agents will be able to search, what results users will be able to produce. Once that boundary is established, we can create test users based on department, role in the organization, and test it out. Try some intuitive searches, try searches for a language model. We have a script of about 50 different searches that we launch to see what comes up, such as financial records, HR records, financial history, legal history. So we launch those prompts with various user roles to see if the boundaries are working. So we want to have that user experience before the actual end user has that experience. And then layered controls, restricting search, DLP, put policies in place for applications. So I'll go through some policies that are helpful. And then again, monitoring governance, monitor what comes up, what results users are getting, what results they're getting that they shouldn't be getting, look through search history and use history, see what results the users are coming up with, and whether results are bringing up documents or notes, emails, repository results that they shouldn't have access to. So with the assessment, either a government assessment pre-Copilot deployment, or for companies that already have deployed Copilot, we try to also work with the customers to educate them on what the risks are. So we showcase some of the risks that we have found with other customers and working on governance rollouts, what other customers have seen without mentioning their name, of course. So we kind of give them a summary of what you should be looking out for. Uh, what findings we see available and what findings may be available in the customer's environment. And we do that by conducting the questionnaire, getting the questionnaire back, and we'll say, based on the fact that you have this many SharePoint sites, each user has a OneDrive, you have connected repositories in Azure using AWS storage repositories. So based on that feedback from questionnaires and talking to the user management or stakeholders, we can create an exposure heat map and kind of prioritize for them what they should be looking at and what they should assess, either if Copilot has already been deployed, if they have deployed ChatGPT, or if they're planning on onboarding AI available to the users, then what they should look for. We make recommendations on the boundaries for the pilot, and then we provide them with a control roadmap. So here's a list of controls that should be put in place, and we can prioritize them. Here's what you do first, here's what you do second and third, to make it more digestible. More critical items and broader search capabilities, controls those first, and also information that has a larger blast radius. So if there's information out there that's financial or HR, trade secrets, that has a bigger blast radius, then that should be number one concern on the roadmap, and that should be addressed first. So key takeaways from this, my slides. I'm coming up to the end of the slides. I'm going to try to keep it within an hour, close to it. Permission trimmed does not equal low risk. Permissions are applied over years, sometimes decades. Users move roles. Users inherit data from other users. They inherit data from other teams. How often customers of Microsoft go through their SharePoint sites to see who, in fact, actually has permissions to something. So if you run a SharePoint site or site collection or collection of teams in Microsoft Teams, how often do you go in there to actually look who has permissions to what? Most of customers that I have gone through have done inventories, but they're either not up to date or many years ago, they don't remember the results, remediation was never put in place or not finished. So that's what I'm seeing working with the customers in the field. Any oversharing becomes AI exposure. Retrieval and summarization is easier because AI agents, AI platforms provide synthetic, on-the-spot search results, where a user searching manually, going through Microsoft Search, going through the index, would have to go through a variety of documents presented as results, where Copilot can do that, or AI can do that almost instantly and provide you with results, combine results from various documents and repositories, present to the user. And assessments should be hybrid. They should be modular. Some automated discovery, some manual discovery, questionnaires, interviewing stakeholders, as well as going through application settings in Microsoft 365 and connected apps to make sure that the controls that are offered through the application settings or platform settings are in place. And I'll show some of those to you now. So ideally, governance should come before rollout, but in most cases, I've never had anyone come and say, we're planning to deploy Copilot and we need some help with governance. Every single time it's been, we already have Copilot running. We've seen some strange or unexpected results in the search. We want to find out how to put some governance in place. Unfortunately, this is the most common theme right now. This is what I'm seeing. And I'll provide my contact info if you have questions, but I do want to share a matrix of restrictions and controls in Microsoft 365. So these are some of the controls that I use, and it's not all of them, but some of them are. List privilege controls and permission controls in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Team. Look at the tenant, the sites, the libraries, the teams, the notes, apps that are integrated with Teams. So those can be blocked from Copilot search. They can be blocked in-app. They can be restricted in Microsoft search results. You can restrict an app within Teams. You can restrict a URL. You can restrict a Microsoft 365 group or a team. And if that's blocked, then users cannot retrieve or summarize content. There are some caveats. SharePoint search restrictions. There's an allow list also in SharePoint. And by modifying and segregating that SharePoint search list, you can control what is the scope of the search allowed in the tenant. So it can also be URLs, sites, libraries, restricted content discovery. This is per site. So within a site, you can restrict Copilot or connected AI agents. You can do actually a test, and then you can do a restriction within a site. What results can be retrieved? So that's useful because it's immediate. It locks down the site right away. It doesn't have to wait for the content to update in the index. Libraries. So this is restrictions in the SharePoint lists. You can remove specific lists and libraries from showing up in the search. So site content in SharePoint can still show up, but you can restrict a specific library item or list within SharePoint from appearing within results. And you can filter that by location or user or group. So that has some use itself. Purview and sensitivity labels, that will restrict Copilot from returning results from protected files. So if a file is protected, the content will not be indexed or presented to Copilot unless a user has specific usage rights. So you could have a document that's labeled, that's sitting within a SharePoint site or a folder in Teams that has SharePoint as backend storage, so to speak. The site or the folder itself can be indexed, but that specific document, for that specific document that's labeled, the results can only be presented through semantic search. And that's semantic search to the user or group that specifically has access granted through Microsoft Purview. So it gives you an additional layer of control. Blocking analysis services in Purview. That will block documents that are labeled in Purview from being accessible through the Microsoft connected experiences, such as Copilot, through the agent itself in the dashboard, or through Copilot features in various apps. So you can use that to block in-app Copilot for specific categories of documents that have a label on them. For example, if I have a label on documents in my HR repository, I can restrict any document with that label. So Purview doesn't even have to have a specific granular per user permission. It could be restricted by a label. So when a document is labeled or let's say onboarded into Purview, It can have a classification with a label, and it can have encryption, or it can have just a label. So you can say that documents, even if they're not restricted through encryption, if they have a specific label on them, restrict those from Copilot search results. So that's one other way. And then policy location, you can prevent Copilot from using contacts with specific labels and locations. So you can combine if a document is in a certain repository and has a certain label, even if it's not encrypted within that label, because a label can have encryption or classification or just classification. So I can create conditions where if it's in a specific location and has a label, then that content should not be retrievable. And then RAC, restricted access control. This is something that's done within Microsoft 365 tenant, SharePoint tenant and Teams, and also Microsoft 365 groups. This can lock down broad oversharing. So you can restrict access in addition to existing controls. You can restrict access for retrieval to specific groups. So you can say that a group, unless you're in a specific group, even if you have permissions to the document, you cannot access certain documents. Let's say somebody who is a member of maintenance should not have access to finance. So you can make that happen. And then connectors, you can disable Copilot visibility to external data. So that's the first thing that I see most companies do, is they say, we're not going to allow any connectors to Copilot. So the user will be restricted through their interface from establishing connectors from Copilot to external repositories. And then graph. You can limit graph usability by deleting scopes, indexing scopes from the graph connector. There's a graph connector availability. That's where you have in-scope data that graph can access itself. So it's what Microsoft calls graph pulse. Get me metadata, get me data about data, so that I can then figure out how to better go search for that data. So you can limit those graph scopes by graph connector limitations within that scope. So this is the control matrix, and I also wanted to go over some of the apps within Microsoft 365 that have settings that help with governance. So Microsoft Purview, I already went over some of those. You can do labeling and classification, and then base policies on the labels and classifications. You can have automatic rules for labeling if you're integrating Purview with Defender for Cloud Apps, and then that will control Copilot access. You can also integrate endpoint DLP, and endpoint DLP is natively integrated with Purview. And what that means is the endpoint agent running on users Windows 11, when they create a document, receive a document, store a document on their local machine, that endpoint DLP can search, label, classify, and encrypt the document on their machine. And once it does that, even if they take that document, drag it into ChatGPT or drag it into Copilot, that document will not be indexable or searchable because it's restricted through that endpoint DLP connector and labeled by Purview. So this is how individual documents on user's machine can be restricted. Communication compliance. This is something that integrates Purview with Exchange Online. You can restrict certain documents from being indexed, like emails or attachment within emails. You can say if an email contains a credit card number,
I don't want that to be to appear in search because I've tried with some companies that I have helped. I would go into Copilot and say, give me every credit card number that's accessible to me right now through doing enterprise search. It would actually go and find credit card numbers from emails where there was one case where an assistant was um, sending her boss's credit card number to a company purchasing something, and that email had everything: credit card number, expiration date, the code in the back of the card. So um, if you have access to that through either a group, shared mailbox, or that credit card information is saved in a Word document and that's uploaded to SharePoint or Teams or was in a chat somewhere, it's a very interesting experiment to do. I always try to do that just to play with Copilot and see if that's crazy and if that's crazy enough for the companies to have credit card available. So I'll tell Copilot, go search for a credit card number. So um, uh, integration with Purview can help that by a DLP rule that will search out um, credit card numbers, classifying and protecting those documents, and then restricting them from search. Intune, so there's a block policy that's available to Android and iOS, and you can also do that on other handheld devices where you can block copy paste. Like if you don't want somebody to copy well, this goes back to endpoint management. There are certain endpoint management policies that should be in place if you're allowing customers to bring their own devices. So if they're allowed to do that, to bring their own devices, then there should be some controls in place. But often I see that that's not enough. So there are specific policies that will block copy and paste and protect what's called protected office applications. You can block office apps within user-owned devices by forcing them to open application in a company-controlled tenant. So there are some Copilot dependent and Copilot related settings in that. Disk encryption, it's always good to have, and it's something that I always look at, whether there's a BitLocker or File Vault or some other third-party tool in place. McAfee encryption, many customers use that for devices themselves, because those policies, like some of those would be blocking access. For example, block USB or thumb drives. You can have a user that comes in, plugs in a USB device, reads a document or submits a document to Copilot and says, here's my document. I brought that from home. Find everything that relates to this document that I brought in. And then Copilot will start cross-referencing the document they brought from home with documents available to the user. So that producing synthetic results that they couldn't produce before. Access from non-compliant devices. So you can restrict what devices can access Copilot. You can do that in Intune or through a conditional access policy. And then app governance in Entra ID in combination with Intune. So you can block user access through user consent and user access controls that are centralized through something like Intune or app governance in Entra ID. And then publishing the Copilot itself. What controls exist or already in place. So there are configuration options in Copilot that you can set. I would look at what configuration options have been set in place when the Copilot was deployed. Currently, there are many customers that are blocking it outright because they don't have the governance in place. So I would look at that, see what's in place right now, what controls can be adjusted. And then user training, It's always social engineering dependent. Train the IT staff, train the users on what to do and what not to do. That's always good to have. So human behavior engineering and human behavior adjustment. So that comes to the end of our 1 hour and 6 minutes. Let me see if there are any questions in the chat. I don't have any questions in the chat. Are there any questions from the audience or comments or feedback on how to make this better next time? Okay. And also I'll send participants a link to where you can watch the video and read my article on AI governance. And feel free to reach out. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it, and have a good day.